For a while, I believed the doctors when they said nothing was wrong. Every test came back normal. Blood work, scans, neurological exams. The words were always the same: everything looks fine. But every morning my body disagreed. I would wake up before the alarm, a heavy wave of nausea already building behind my ribs. Not the kind that passes after coffee or fresh air. This one sat inside me like a slow storm. My head would spin when I stood up. Sometimes the room tilted so sharply I had to grab the dresser just to stay upright. By noon, it usually faded. By evening, I could almost convince myself it had never happened. Then the next morning would arrive and start again. The strangest part was how ordinary everything else remained. I still worked. I still hosted dinner for friends. I still volunteered at the same charity events I had attended for years. From the outside, nothing had changed. Except for the quiet dread of waking up. Through all of it, I wore the same pair of earrings. They were small, simple silver drops with a thin dark stone set into each one. My daughter had given them to me 2 birthdays earlier. She'd bought them during a trip overseas, wrapped them in bright paper, and watched me open them with the kind of hopeful excitement only children have when giving gifts. "They reminded me of you," she had said, so I wore them often. Eventually they became something I stopped thinking about. Like a wedding ring or a watch, they were just part of my daily shape. The charity event that evening was crowded but pleasant. It was one of those large community fundraisers held in a hotel ballroom, soft lighting, too many round tables, quiet music in the background while people moved between conversations. I was halfway through a polite discussion about sponsorship donations when someone tapped my elbow. It wasn't unusual. These events involved constant introductions. But the man standing beside me didn't seem interested in conversation. He was watching my ears. Not my face. Not the room. Just the earrings. For a moment, I assumed he was trying to remember where he had seen me before. People often did that polite scanning of strangers' faces. But his attention was too precise. He leaned slightly closer and spoke quietly, like someone asking for directions. "If you want to stay alive," he said calmly, "you should take those earrings off." I stared at him. The words were so absurd they felt almost theatrical. I laughed. Not loudly, just enough to show I wasn't taking him seriously. "Are you serious?" I said, touching one of them lightly. "My daughter gave these to me." He didn't smile. That was the first detail that unsettled me. Most people would have backed away after a reaction like mine. They would have apologized, made a joke, blamed a misunderstanding. He simply studied the earrings for another moment. Then he said something that made the laughter drain from my face. "How long have you been waking up dizzy in the mornings?" The room around us didn't stop. Conversations continued. Glasses clinked. Someone laughed near the stage. But my mind went completely still. I had never told anyone at that event about the dizziness. I hadn't even told most of my friends. I opened my mouth to respond but nothing came out. The man spoke again, still calm. "You don't need to explain anything to me," he said. "But if those earrings stay on you much longer, you may not have the chance." Then he stepped back, not dramatically, not urgently. He simply moved into the crowd and disappeared among the guests like someone who had just finished a routine conversation. I stood there for several seconds before realizing I was still touching the earring. The stone felt cool. Normal. I left the event early. I told the organizers I wasn't feeling well, which was technically true. By the time I reached my car, my hands were shaking in a way I couldn't quite explain. It would have been easy to dismiss the entire encounter. A strange man. A strange comment. But he had known about the mornings. That detail sat inside my mind like a weight. When I reached home, I went straight to the bathroom mirror. The earrings looked the same as they always had. Simple. Elegant. Completely harmless. I removed one and held it under the light. The back clasp felt slightly heavier than I remembered. Not dramatically. Just enough that I noticed it now that I was looking for something. I turned it between my fingers. There was a seam along the metal near the stone, so thin I had never seen it before. My stomach tightened. The next morning, the dizziness came again. Stronger than usual. That was when I decided I needed someone else to look at them. Not a doctor this time, someone who understood materials. A friend of mine worked in a small laboratory connected to a university research department. He specialized in analyzing metals and chemical compounds for industrial projects. When I called, I kept the explanation simple. I just want to make sure something is safe. I told him. He agreed to meet me that afternoon. The moment he held the earrings, his expression changed. Not fear, but curiosity sharpened into concern. "Where did you get these?" he asked. "My daughter bought them while traveling," I said. He turned one slowly under a magnifying lens. "There's a cavity inside this setting," he said quietly. My chest tightened. "A cavity?" He nodded. "Jewelry doesn't normally have sealed internal chambers." The room felt suddenly smaller. He carefully placed the earring inside a small testing tray and used a precision tool to loosen the seam I had noticed the night before. The metal opened with a faint click. Inside the hollow compartment was a dark powder sealed beneath a thin, inner layer. My friend leaned back in his chair. "We need to stop here," he said. His voice had changed. "This isn't something I should test privately." Within hours, the earrings were in the hands of professionals who handled hazardous materials. I spent the evening answering questions. When the results came back 2 days later, the explanation was both simple and deeply unsettling. The earrings contained a small quantity of toxic material designed to release trace exposure through prolonged skin contact, not enough to cause immediate harm, but enough to accumulate slowly, enough to explain weeks of dizziness and nausea. The investigators believed the design was intentional, the kind of mechanism sometimes used in extremely rare criminal cases involving concealed toxins. The question of how they ended up in a small jewelry shop overseas remained complicated. The question of who the stranger was remained even more mysterious. No one could identify him from the event guest list. No security camera clearly captured his face. In the end, the official report closed with several uncertainties. But one fact was undeniable. If I had continued wearing those earrings, the exposure would have worsened. My health began improving within days of removing them. The mornings slowly returned to normal. The nausea faded. The dizziness disappeared. But even now, months later, I still think about the moment in that crowded ballroom. The quiet voice. The strange certainty. "If you want to stay alive, take those earrings off." I never saw the man again. Sometimes I wonder if he had recognized the design, or if he had simply noticed something the rest of us missed. Either way, the earrings are gone now. My daughter cried when she learned what had happened. Not because she had done anything wrong, but because something meant as love had unknowingly carried danger. I told her the truth. The gift itself had never been the problem. Trusting it without question had been. And somewhere out there is a man who interrupted a stranger's evening for less than 30 seconds and quietly saved her life.